What I'm interested to talk about today is the architectural and urban consequences of augmented reality and virtual reality. So in the context of the new normal, we're at a point where those two things are going to start to merge. Maybe a better term to start to describe this impending world is mixed reality, right? I think we're right on the edge of where AR and VR are going to collapse together, and soon it will just be a matter of dialing up or down the levels of opacity through which we view the world. I think right now there's just a bit more computational problems to solve with augmented reality, things like understanding the world, machine vision, spatial understanding that need to be cracked. And that's why VR is the catchphrase and the buzzword at the moment. But as soon as we start to understand and work through those computational problems, then these two things are going to be one and the same. And the headset will start to dissolve into something that's more natural and casual. But what will happen is that the physical will start to become consistently overlaid with various forms of digital and augmented content. And we'll just make decisions on how much of that physical world we want to see at any point in time. So at the end of a hard day, we may fall back into our chair and just dial down the world as we dial up the latest video game or football match or television broadcast. And then when we're rushing for a bus, we might dial up the physical and we just start to see a wayfinding system overlaid on top of the world. And I think that this collapsing of the logics of the screen on top of the logic of the physical world will fundamentally change what it means to be an architect, and will fundamentally change what it means to design for this world, and in turn how we might occupy it. I think we're entering into a context where the makeup of the physical world is just going to be one very small part of our experience of that world. And I can imagine a situation where we'll soon be all tuned to our own architectural or urban channels. In the same way we channel surf, we might dial in or out of certain realities. I imagine that we might kind of download a Star Wars pack as we're moving through the city, and instead of the bus arriving and me getting on it, the Millennium Falcon pulls up, and Chewie's the bus driver, and together he takes me to work. Or, if you're a massive Manchester United fan, then the entire city is draped in black and red, and all your famous characters are the ones that serve you in the grocery store, or that drive your Uber. So it means that the rules of the screen, or the rules and logics of computer-generated imagery and visual effects, now actually becomes the rules of space and the logics of the urban realm. So we're starting to move into a condition where we'll soon occupy geographies of hashtags or architectures of GPS coordinates, and pop stars like Hatsune Miku, the world's first animated pop star, will actually start to become totally mixed or intermingled with real physical and live pop stars. You see also the emergence of that with a character like Lil Miquela, who at the moment lives on Instagram as the world's first digitally constructed and rendered social media influencer. Soon characters like that will now occupy the world, and it becomes less meaningful whether we're having physical interactions or whether we're interacting with non-playable characters that are no longer occupying a game space, but are now occupying the physical landscapes of the city. So I think what these conditions mean is that we're entering the end of the render. A term like render is now over, because the idea of the rendering as this digital simulation of something to come is no longer going to be valid, because the render itself becomes occupiable. So things like developer renderings or unbuilt competition entries, or even the renderings and the CG imagery of Hollywood blockbusters, aren't just things of fantasy or speculative futures, but they're now occupiable and lived realities that are just as real for us as the physical constructs of this room around us. And again, that suggests that the role of the architect that has spent generations and generations exploring what it means to design with brick, or how to timber detail or a wall junction, or understanding the fluidity of a material like concrete, now needs to start again as we start to understand resolution and refresh rates, GPS coordinates and how they work, satellite sightlines and machine vision systems and calibration markers, all things that are going to be the real material that architects are now going to start to be designing with. And in this context, what becomes interesting is that the infrastructure that now will structure and define cities is going to have more to do with bandwidth and refresh rates than it once did with physical freeways or water and power networks. And you're going to move into a world where graphic card power and processing speed is actually primary forms of infrastructure. And what will of course come along with that is the idea that resolution will become a new form of class, so that certain areas will be determined by the resolution through which we see them, rather than trump gold-plated elevators. The new form of wealth isn't going to be the visual and material expression of rare materials or expensive finishes, but is going to be super slick resolution, super high level refresh rates. And we're soon going to go slumming it in a low res hipster bar. So your understanding of the world will start to be measured by things like 300 DPI versus 150 DPI, things like 24 frames per second or 48 frames a second. And these are going to be the new forms of wealth, or at least new forms of mapping affluence across a city. The Louis Vuitton handbag store is going to be much more higher res than the local DMV vehicle licensing center. And then in the context of this world where the functions of the screen have moved into the functions of space and the rules of CG now become real, the other question we can start to ask is what happens to the physical world when all of this complexity, all of this detail, all of this life disappears into the thickness of a screen or the lens of Google Glass or Oculus Rift. And in a way, for architects, that's another thing that we need to start to understand, is not just the design of these pixel and digital imaginaries, but also we need to start to think about what happens when we turn this off, and what is the physical world that's left behind, and what is the roles and responsibilities of that space. And perhaps one way of thinking about it is to explore the analogy of the green screen studio, because perhaps that's in a way what architecture starts to become, just a scaffold for a digitally constructed world. These green screen studios that occupy places like Los Angeles or Montreal or London, centers of the film industry, are just these exceptionally blank rooms covered in green, just like the walls behind us now. And their role is not to construct and define physical space, but just to be a scaffold for a digitally constructed world. Their role is to be as neutral as possible, so that on any given day, this space can be turned into the surface of an alien planet ready for an invasion, or the rainy streets in New York ready for that final scene and that last kiss in a ditzy romantic comedy. So in a way, physical architecture becomes reduced to a screen. And calibration markers, the sort of black crosshairs, and little QR code type of patterns that you see sprayed across the walls of these green screen studios, will become a new form of ornament, as physical buildings become covered in these markers, which are going to be used to locate the digital world. And architecture just becomes these neutral surfaces ready for the premiere of 1 million animated movies that will illuminate their surface with color and detail and personal specificities. So these physical spaces start to be organized now around machine vision graphics and the properties of those machine vision systems that are all used to locate precisely this digital layer, so that you don't get kind of misfits and Pokemon creatures kind of floating in midair instead of being located on the floor. So in a way, I can imagine a very near future where a wall or corner might be straight or meet at a perfect right angle, not in some nod or throwback to architectural modernism, but in order to more accurately position a digital ghost. And again, the skills and the properties of architectural form making and the making of cities start to become engineered around these digital infrastructures, the necessities of these digital ghosts. And again, it's a totally new set of skills, and also speaks to totally new roles for us as architects or designers, where actually we start to operate more like game developers or visual effects artists than we do the makers and shapers of physical objects. We start to become experts in photons and pixels and resolution and animation, much more so than timber detailing, bricks, and structural systems. Because we're all merging and walking into this world where our faces are bright in the rolling glow of a pixel screen aurora.